Okay, so let's get into some code. So I have Visual Studio, and this is a bot that I built to consider the concepts of adaptive waterfall, if you will. And we'll talk about what that really means. We consider the bot itself as I walk through this. A bot is, in this case, from our basic bot template, which has a connection to both Lewis and Q&A, kind of out of the box. It has a dialog bot and a dialog and welcome bot. So if you click on the dialog bot itself, you notice this is really built across this activity handler. So when information is coming in, we call it an activity, and we're allowed to take a look at that and see when it comes in, what are the different bits of information that are coming in. Is this a message activity? Is this a conversation update activity? Is this an event? What's actually coming into the bot, and then how do we then handle that? And if you're not as familiar with C# and injection patterns, we can certainly have another discussion on that. But the important bits of information for this dialog bot that you see coming in are really around this on turn. Now, the on turn is what happens every time information comes into the bot. So this is kind of the central activity that occurs. And you'll see that it's calling a base activity here for that activity handler. And then you see when we talk about those bits of state on 39 and 40, two different state objects, if you will, that conversation state that we talked about, and also that user state that has occurred. So as we make changes within our bot itself, it's going to make sure it saves these over and over again. And then the next part is really around this message activity, which is going to allow us to do different components. And in this case, it's simply doing a log information. And we'll see that kind of in the bot context as we run it. Now, from a dialog perspective, using the basic bit of information, there is a main dialog, and then I've also added this what we call step dialog. So if I go into the main dialog, we have the recognizer here. I remember we talked about these dialogues, so there's a prompt dialog there. There's also this concept of a booking dialog, which if you run this, it'll show you how you book a flight, kind of simulated gathering information to book a flight. But from our perspective, we're looking at this smart step dialog, which is one that I have defined, and we'll walk through how it works. The next one is this waterfall dialog, which tells us what are the set of steps that we're going to run through. And you'll see it has three steps: this intro step, this act step, and then this final step that's occurring. And as we look at them, here's the intro step. It's going to check to see if that Lewis recognizer is created. It's going to then use this message factory to prompt the user directly. All right. And if we go ahead and run this, then let's see what we're going to get from there. So we start the bot to running. And when you start running a bot, it typically is going to start up on port 3978, which you'll need to consider if you have multiples running at the same time on your system, because you can run into one and then hit the next one as well. Let's see if it's going to be nice to me today, considering I'm running on an update. Well, within this one, I have this smart waterfall bot. And when you have a bot configuration within the emulator itself, it's going to allow you to specify the endpoint for the bot. And it's also going to allow you to specify the app ID and the password, because that's kind of how we secure bots with an app registrations to Azure Active Directory. So the first thing you see here when it comes up is this intro, right? And if we look back at our intro, you would find that, oh, by the way, it's going to create this adaptive card and send that back directly out to us. And then after it did that, it gave us this, what can I help you with today? Say something like book a flight from Paris to Berlin. If we look back here, we'll see that occurred in our intro step. And then it gave us this prompt with that information coming directly back out. So that's how we send information back out to the user itself using that prompt. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint in on the next one. This is act step. And then I also put a breakpoint in to show unsupported. So each of those is going to be different. But I, as the user, I'm going to come through and I'm going to say, calculate. Okay. So we see we're in this breakpoint, we're in this act step, okay, which is that second step we defined. And as I step over, it's going to run that Lewis. Okay, you saw it respond, so it made an asynchronous call. And we get this top intent back from this Lewis result here. You see that text is calculate. And if we do the intent, actually it's saying cancel in this case. Because if we looked at the Lewis model for that, it has no idea what calculate means, but it thinks it's pretty close to the cancel intent. And if we hover back over that again, matter of fact, if we select it down here, you'll see this intent, and you'll see that its score is only about 68%. So calculate kind of matches the word cancel about 68%. So that's what it told us that it wants us to start running. All right. But as we came through here, I didn't have a book flight intent. I didn't have a get weather intent. So it kind of went through this default, which is where I kind of put my code in. And you'll see that I put in this, what we call step dialog data. And I also have this max operands equals 3. And you'll see what next I'm doing when we get in that. But I'm doing begin dialog on my smart step dialog. So first I'm just going to run through it and we'll see what this means. Okay, so we got please enter the operand for step 1. I'm going to put in 2035. Okay, select the operator for step 2. I'm going to say add. I'm going to say 5 for step 3. Add. Didn't like that. Now notice it said step 2 or back. Notice it pulled back. So I do want add. Step 3, I want 5. Then I'm going to subtract 10. Now I've entered 3 operands, right? And you'll see I did 0, add 35, add 5, subtract 10, 30. And then what else can I do for you? So what we just shown is a text prompt. And notice when I put in a set of text for a number, it just went back a step, right? Which is not what it's commonly done, but we'll show you how I ended up with that logic itself. But the way I built this dialog was to be able to take and do some calculation of the 35, in this case, any operands I put in to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and the rest. So I can also send this code out to each of us here. But on the right side here, you see these are the messages that are going back and forth. And you'll see that message there is that card. We have a reply, and then that post. We'll see the subtraction. The emulator itself will give you this information. So in this case, we see that our channel ID is emulator. If we were coming from Teams, it would say MS Teams. If you're coming in web chat, it would say web chat. So you can do different things depending upon what your channel that you have coming in is. All right. So in this case, I'll go back over to the bot itself and show you the step dialog. From a step dialog perspective, I have a step operation. You see that from the add subtract through division. I also have this step dialog, which is kind of a class I'm using. So I have a list of integers and I have a list of operations. I also have what step ID I'm on and what my maximum number of operands is so that I can decide how many I want to get. I also have a trunk operation, which is going to manipulate that list when I want to go back. Same thing for operations. But from a dialog perspective, you'll see that I have this. So my Smart Step dialog has a text prompt, a choice prompt, and then this waterfall dialog, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 things inside of it. So I'm going to prompt, I'm going to process, I'm going to prompt, I'm going to process, and then I'm going to do final. The reason I chose this pattern is because if I'm trying to get information in order to do a calculation, in general, I'm going to have an operand, and then I may have another operator. So if I have 2 operands, right, then I have 2 operands, 1 operation. So I need to be able to decide what I'm going to do for that. I have a get operation choices, which you'll see I'm doing add, subtract, multiply, divide, remainder, and then a back as an additional choice. And then you'll see if I'm doing my prompt for operand, here's my template itself saying, please enter the operand. And then I create my message factory and then send that prompt out. Whereas on the process, I'm deciding how many I need to truncate off, and then I'm then adding that operand in, kind of the reverse for the operator here. So each of those, as I said, I prompt for the information and then I process the information. And then finally, in my final step, you'll see where I am taking the information from that dialog itself, because all this is being stored in my step dialog options that's being passed into the dialog. And then I just roll through, do the operation, set a value, and then finally send out this information here, which using string interpolation to give them what that operation was and then what that new value is. And then finally, I call end dialog. So end dialog is going to take us back up the stack and then allow us to do something else if we want to. So that's the simple set of code that's going to allow us to do that. Now, if I went back to the main dialog here, and if I change this number to a 2, then I only get 2 operands. If I change it to 5, then I get 5 operands, right? It's a way of me being able to change what I want to send that over. I could certainly, instead of hard coding this, have made another dialog to find out, oh, how many operands do I have? And then use that to then drive this. So that's another way of going about that. So this is a simple example of how do we get information in, how do we turn around and then build dialogues that are effectively re-entrant. Because if I have more than one step here, which you'll see, let's do it one more time. So see where I had calculate that last time? If I put in a nonsense word, right, we're coming back to that act step again, back in that main dialog. In this case, our top intent, expand this one more time, list result, intents. Remember how I talked about that none intent? So it matched the none intent about 87% because it had no idea what that word I typed in was. But then it's going to turn around and do this step dialog. So once again, we have the operand for step 1, 50. Now let me go over to the code here so that you'll see what happens in that final step. There's a replace for that. There's my send. All right. So if I say divide by 10, We got 0, and it did all of these over in those particular steps. So in this case, we've done a replace because I only get 2 steps in each of these dialogues. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right.